Good morning, everyone. My name is Danielle McNichol with Neumann University Center for Leadership. Today, we have a very special event partnering with our longtime partners at Neumann University Center for Leadership, Bellevue Communications, and we have senior staff with us. We're very excited to hear from them today about building brand awareness, earning news coverage amid social distancing for small businesses and not-for-profits. If you have any questions throughout, please feel free to put your questions in chat or the Q&A section, and we will be happy to answer any of those questions. If you could, please make sure to put your settings on mute so that we are able to have a clear recording of today's program. The link for this will be available at Newman the Center for Leadership website, as well as Open Indelco. And the resources, at the end of this, we will provide you with a copy of the slide with all of the resources, the contact information, as well as the opportunity to further any discussions that you may have with the panelists. At this time, I would like to turn the presentation over to Alex Steyr, the Director of Digital Media at Bellevue Communication Group. Good morning, Alex.
Morning, Annie. Thanks so much, and good morning to everyone attending. We're really happy to have you with us on a Friday morning. And this is a really great opportunity for myself as well, because it's not every day that I get to interview three of my bosses. So thank you for joining me for that piece. Want to get started with a couple of introductions to the group here. And ultimately, we are all members of Bellevue Communications Group. If you're not familiar with your firm, we're a full-service public relations, strategy, and digital media firm based out of Philadelphia. We have about 10 people on staff, and we do things basically from getting our clients in the media, basic stories, and ultimately we are, got a little scratchy audio. Might be muting yourself. Anyway, hopefully you guys can hear me now a little better. We're going to try and mute people as we, speak to each other. So anyway, with that, just kind of go around the group. I'm going to kick things off to my immediate left on my screen to London Faust. London is digital media manager with Bellevue Communications. London, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I have been with Bellevue Communications for 5 years now. As Alex said, I'm the digital media manager, and I am part of a team that helps build out our social media and digital media arm, in addition to doing public relations work. I'm a Temple University graduate, and I am president-elect for the Philadelphia Public Relations Association.
Thanks, London. Now heading straight down to my big boss, Kevin Feeley, president of Bellevue. Please, Kevin, tell us a little bit about yourself as well.
Good morning, everybody. I've never been described as a big boss before, so I'm not sure how that all feels. My name is Kevin Feeley. I've worked at Bellevue for 20 years, which is just slightly longer than Pete Peterson, who's one of the panelists on this call, on this conference as well. Our company began, frankly, out of what we saw as a need to provide help for folks who find themselves dealing with public messaging in one way or the other. Sometimes it's good news, sometimes it's bad. Our job is to help you figure out what that news is, how to make news one way or the other, and when it's bad, how to control it, and see to it that it doesn't impact your business in a negative way. So I'm happy to be here this morning. The folks that are here with us on this panel, I like to tell them that I work for them. So take it away, Alex.
Thanks, Kevin. Next up, Pete Peterson. Pete is Vice President at Bellevue Communications. And Pete, give us a little bit of background on yourself, too.
Sure. So as Kevin said, I've been with Bellevue 20 years now. Before that, I worked on Capitol Hill for 5 years. So with Bellevue, I represent a range of clients, both government, nonprofit, and business clients, and working with them on earned media, how to get into the press, and then also various marketing components through social media, through direct mail, through phone calls, town halls, but in large part, communications directly with the public through working with news media.
Thanks so much, Pete. Last but not least, Mike Neilon, Vice President of Media Relations for Bellevue Communications. Mike, give us a little background about yourself.
Hey, thanks, Alex. Thanks, Newman University, and thank you, Danny, for having all of us. I'm Mike Neilon. For the last 20 years, I was behind the scenes at 6 ABC Action News, trying to decide on a daily basis what should make air and what should fall to the cutting room floor. So I subsequently left that intensely fast-paced environment, thought that I would parachute into the public relations game, and that is equally as intense and fast-paced. So it's been a great change, and working with my colleagues Alex in London and Kevin and Pete, as we always tell people, we all have firing line experience, so we know what it takes to be in the news, be on the news, and sometimes importantly, stay out of the news. So it's an honor and a pleasure to be here today to try to help some of these small business owners navigate this landscape that we're in and working within the pandemic.
Thanks, Mike. And I think that's a great sort of segue into sort of how I want to frame this conversation. It was something that I heard the other day. I was on another webinar, because webinars are the way of the world right now, and heard somebody basically say that COVID-19, it's accelerated the rate of change that was already taking place in our world. And it accelerated it to a really, really high degree. And I think that's going to frame our conversation today, because whilst the need for messaging has not changed, our jobs as a sort of structural, thing has not really changed. But the way in which we perform our job has changed drastically. And it falls in line with a lot of the themes and a lot of the trends that we've seen happening in the news media over the last several years. But essentially within the last month or so, the sort of change that was taking place over years was broken down into weeks. So with that, I want to take a quick second to ask everyone in the panel about media consumption, because I think that is a really important piece. We are kind of, for sort of people broken down by different age brackets, and we all have very different consumption habits. So first off, and I want to kick this one to Kevin first, and I want to ask, where and how are you currently consuming media? So that's part one of the question. And then second, which is kind of related to that, what is your top daily news source right now? Is it the same as before COVID, or is it something different? So Kevin, let me jump in first, and you're on mute too.
Thanks, Alex. I am a creature of habit. So my habits changed, I guess, more in the last 5 years than they have in the last 5 weeks. I consume news almost entirely now digitally. I have regular subscriptions to the Philadelphia newspapers. I keep an eye on local news websites from television, and then for a little extra flavor, I use the New York Times and the Washington Post. But it is, what I will tell you is that news gets consumed in smaller bites, particularly when you're doing it by phone. You can't sit there and read a 20-inch, news story. You find yourself reading not 140 characters, but not a whole lot more. And so that requires me to go to more and more sites to be sure that what I'm getting is an accurate picture, as opposed to something that is a little too filtered and a little too one-sided. So that's pretty much how I do it.
Great. London, want to hear from you.
I feel like everybody on this call is going to hate my answer, since our business is, driven by reading the news. But I have been avoiding the news during this time because it's just really bad for my anxiety, and I'm sure everyone can relate to, seeing something on the news and just like having that totally derail your day. Prior to this, I would, read Feeley.com every day. I guess it's Inquirer.com now, because it was the homepage on my work computer. I haven't really gotten into that routine at home. I used to get a lot of my news from Twitter because I follow a lot of journalists, a lot of news outlets. I don't go on Twitter because it is a scary, sad place right now. I don't have cable, so I don't really watch the news on TV. So what I would say about that is I'm very intentional about the news that I'm consuming right now. So I get the emails from the mayor's communications office every day, and that's how I feel like I'm staying in touch with what's happening with coronavirus, specifically in our city. But then I'm really only seeking out news about brands and businesses that are important to me. And like news isn't finding me, you know what I mean? I'm not scrolling through something and seeing a random headline. So I would say that I'm a lot harder to target as a consumer right now. And that's something that everybody should kind of keep into consideration, like what is happening to your audience right now? And how are they getting their news? Are they like me and they're just avoiding it? Or, are they like Kevin and they're just sticking to their routine and kind of consuming everywhere?
It's a great point. And I think that speaks a lot to, from a business's perspective, how you incorporate social media and how you incorporate your own messaging in addition to trying to, play stories and get that earned media. Because as Lemon said, even if you're investing in that earned media stuff, you may not be hitting your target audience. So again, it's being intentional about where you want to place that message and how you want to get it. Pete, want to turn to you. How are you consuming news? What's your top news source right now?
Consuming news pretty much regular. I get up in the morning, I look at the Inquirer to start, just because they have a pretty good, from my perspective, COVID-19 update. And I actually like to look at it throughout the day because they kind of have a running update of the latest news regionally. Mm-hmm. I also, don't hate me for this, but I go to the Drudge Report a lot, not because it's conservative, but just because it has a wide range of stories from different news sources. I kind of like the way it aggregates different stories of interest. I can just look at the headlines, and it seems like a much more diverse range of news, some international news and stuff. So I'd like to go there as well. The Daily Times, of course, to get the Delaware County coverage. But the one thing that I have found interesting is I've been getting a lot of news, more so than in the past, by word of mouth. I've been doing a lot of Zoom calls. So just talking to other people and participants and family members, I feel like I'm getting a lot more news from interacting with other people than I probably have in the past, because I feel like we're chatting more about what's current in the news and what's happening around the world more so than perhaps we did before COVID-19.
Sort of interconnectivity of the audience itself, rather than actual just news consumption on a one-way. Yeah, very interesting, Pete. Mike Neilon, last up. Tell me, where are you getting your news right now?
Similar to Pete and Kevin, I mean, I start my day, I'm still a news junkie, and my habits haven't really changed during the pandemic, but, I'll look at the Inquirer.com, I'll take a peek at the New York Times and the Washington Post, but also I want to look at regional papers, the Delco Times and the Bucks County Courier and the Pottstown Mercury and the Daily Local and some of the other papers, Penn Live, just to look for trends or angles of stories that we feel that we might be able to parachute into a story with a particular client, or find ways and try to anticipate ways that newsrooms are beginning to cover their respective areas. And because we're always looking for a way, at least for small business owners, to try to find a way to make them relevant, to slide them into a story. Most likely, big media and others aren't just going to specifically target your particular business. They may group you into another subset of folks. So I'm always looking for, why are they covering it this way? What's their angle? And I agree with Pete. I mean, you do get a solid running. It's like Twitter on steroids with the Philadelphia Inquirer in their front page COVID-19 coverage. So, for me, it really hasn't changed. I'm like Kevin, a creature of habit, but I want to be able to get, to look at all those sources, and then I'll put my toe in the water and go on social media and join the frenzy of what's happening there on social media.
Sure. I would say, similar to London, well, besides the fact that I am actually still diving into Twitter, I know that it is a rampant cesspool of lots of different things. But for me, news consumption really happens on Twitter because I follow a lot of reporters, both locally, regionally, statewide, and then some national as well. But that is really the way in which, and so I kind of branch off from there into any number of different sites. WHYY is a big one for me. Still really love their reporters and just generally their take on things. So that would probably be my number one, top one. But anyway, good kind of way to segue into our next question, which is going to go to Mike. Because you said this about, you're always kind of looking at sort of how the newsrooms are either changing their coverage or changing their approach. How has that day-to-day newsroom approach changed right now?
Like small businesses who are trying to navigate whatever that footprint's going to look like, all the major newsrooms in the city, including the Inquirer and others, they're all, for the most part, working from home. And the news gathering has gotten a whole lot more clunky. And as you guys know, there's a lot more Zoom interviews and Google Meetup interviews and FaceTime interviews that are now pretty prevalent in all the newscasts across the city. And we'll see whether that's going to continue in the future, but that's happening because newsrooms have put restrictions on some of their reporters about being out there in the field and interacting with the public because of the pandemic. So, they're still trying to find, and like any other business, they're trying to keep their staff and their personnel safe and healthy. And, but with that comes the clunkiness of trying to gather in a 10-county region. I mean, you have to think of the local media is covering Jersey, Delaware, and Pennsylvania, and it's a wide swath, and they have some real challenges.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And so, I mean, on that note, then, is it still feasible to reach reporters in the newsroom, or is it all kind of moving towards email, or is it cell phones? What has been your experience, Mike, in terms of reaching reporters actually?
I mean, it's gotten a whole lot more difficult, but look, reporters are still thirsty for a good, solid story. And, and for small business owners, what they need to think of is what do they do really, really well? And as they consume news, they need to also anticipate how can I fit my business or my operation or my employees into a story. And it's as simple as, it might be a business owner who has decided to make a huge financial investment in their staff and say, hey, I'm going to pay my employees for the duration of the pandemic, which is a huge investment for a small business owner. So you have to try to find a way to shape that and get that in front of the right eyeballs at any of the TV stations, radio stations, your local newspaper, because that probably is going to fit somewhere in a story.
That's great. London, this one's going to go to you. How has social media impacted the way the newsrooms cover, and more particularly how they source news? Want to hear just kind of your perspective, especially given that you've run a lot of accounts that have sort of had this kind of cascading effect of social into news media.
Sure. I mean, I think similarly to how a lot of consumers are getting their news on social media, I have noticed that definitely reporters and editors across the city on all mediums are also sourcing their stories from social media. And a couple of my clients, we've had instances where I get a call from a news station because they saw an Instagram post that I did about a milestone or just a really heartwarming story. So they call me and they ask if they can do a traditional media story, which is really great. And I think if you have someone, if you don't have a PR person, if you're not familiar with doing media relations, but you're comfortable posting on Facebook versus like typing up a press release and sending it, like it's a really good way to make media relations a little bit more accessible. And the way to kind of help the news see your stories on social media is to make sure that you're following them where it's appropriate. You could tag them in the posts, and as long as you are not spammy about it, of course. But I think a lot of reporters are also just putting out there, especially on Twitter, hey, I'm writing a story about this. Does anybody have anything to say? Slide in my DMs, email me, whatever it is. So, it's just a good place to share your story, but also find out what reporters want.
It's such an important note. And I think that is, something that in terms of a trend that I would say I'm seeing as well, that sort of, reporters putting themselves out there on Twitter, on Facebook, jumping into a public group, asking a question about who's experienced this. We're all seeing that right now. So, the more you can sort of be, utilizing social media to be not only as, a sort of, pushing information out there, but also as a consumer of information too. That's really important. Want to throw one to Kevin right now and talk a little bit about messages. And Kevin, what kind of stuff have you seen is really resonating with reporters right now? What kind of messages, what kind of stories are you seeing really resonate with the reporter community right now?
Thanks, Alex. I just want to go back a quick second to talk about something Michael said, reading the paper. When my daughter was younger, I used to bring her to work sometimes. And when she'd come home, my wife would say, what does Daddy do all day? And she'd say, well, he reads the paper and talks on the phone. And, I got back to it and I thought, she's not wrong. Reading the paper is, it's the way we find out not just what's making news, but how we're making news. And so to Mike's point, whether you're reading, the standard newspapers like I do, because I've been around for so long, I'm an old newspaper reporter, or it's whatever platforms you're accessing to get it, that's where the stories are. And when you ask about what stories and what messages resonate, it's as simple as take a look at what they're writing about. As a former newspaper reporter, the story pitches that matter to me are the stories that are the pitches that relate somehow to what I've been doing. So if you make my job easier and you find some way to connect to that message, I'm probably going to listen to it. And that's what we do all the time. Right now, in the middle of COVID-19, probably not a great time to be looking for messages that are not COVID related. But they don't all have to be about, the virus and what it has to, what sort of direct impacts it has. I'm working with a client, for example, who's it's a development project, and they're saying, okay, how do we make news about this? Well, you can try and bang on the door and say, hey, we want you to talk about our development project, in which case you probably get a whole lot of silence from the press, from reporters. Or you can find a way to hitch your wagon to what's happening. And what we're doing is saying, okay, one of the ways we're gonna pitch this is to talk about what kinds of economic stimuli, what kinds of advantages, what kinds of benefits is the public or other people involved going to get from this project when we get back to normal. So it is a COVID-related story, but it's really a development story and an economic development story. And you just got to find a way to hitch your wagon, like I said, to what people are writing and talking about.
That's great. Pete, I want to ask you kind of a similar question, and it's about storytelling and demonstrating value. How do you really, how do you break through in terms of that sort of concept of demonstrating value to either a consumer, a stakeholder, another business, or even like a legislator? I think what tactics would you advise for a small business owner who's looking to kind of break through in terms of that, like Kevin said, finding what's that kind of hook, what's that value that you're going to demonstrate to the public?
Sure. Well, I mean, there's a couple of things there. I mean, right now, I think people want to be helpful and they want to support their neighbors in any way they can. So, to the extent that you can engage your consumers, your customers, and, share with, ask them to be part of helping you, because that's what people want to help other people right now. They want to do what they can to support their friends, family, neighbors, their community. So, if you have customers, say, hey, if you like the food, can you, repost something on Facebook? Can you tell your friends? As I said earlier, I've been getting a lot of news, even about just different stores that are open. One from, the Neumann, put a plug in for Neumann. They have a Facebook group open in Delco where, different restaurants and people who frequent different restaurants can go on. They can post, hey, this store's open. You can shop here. And people are very engaged in that because they realize that that's what kind of drives the local economy. But I mean, if you have customers who, you're engaged with and that are frequenting your business, ask them to help you out by sharing, their happiness or that they shop with you with their friends and neighbors, because that's how word of mouth is really driving a lot of that now too. But, as far as the engagement, one of my clients is the Pennsylvania Horse Racing Association, and there's no horse racing right now. But we've been engaging, the staff for the PHRA has been engaging, their Facebook followers and Twitter followers through just different kind of fun activities. What horse is this based on emojis? They've been doing replays of, old races where people can, guess who's going to win the race by looking at the race card for the day. And it's just finding outlets for people, but then I think it's engaging them in ways that they want to be engaged in right now.
I think that's a really good question that I kind of want to maybe kick around to the rest of the group and see if there's anybody else has any thoughts on this too. Is that how do you communicate with your audience while you're still closed? I mean, Pete gave some great examples for horse racing industry. London, Mike, Kevin, I don't know if either of you three want to jump in terms of some examples of other ways that you've been able to help generate content even when there is not a physical operation. Anybody want to jump in there?
Yeah, I can just kind of speak from social media's perspective. I mean, as I will throughout this entire thing. But I think just because you're closed doesn't mean that you should just go dark and not communicate with your audiences, because, I mean, for social media specifically, if you just stop posting on your pages in 3 months or whenever you decide you're going to reopen, no one's going to see your content anymore because you've just been silent and the algorithms and things like that. But I think that in order to maintain the relationships that you have built with your customers, your audience, you should, be providing them with an update regularly on what's going on how things will look once you reopen, on things that are going on. I mean, I think everybody realizes we're all in this together and we're all really unsure and just navigating a weird time. And, to be human in your communications is so important. And I think, if you own a business and you're comfortable showing your face, like popping on your Facebook page and doing a quick video and just saying, "Hey everyone, we're still here. We miss you. We can't wait until be back." Like just kind of showing that human aspect is really important and a really effective way to do that right now.
Just one more thing on that, Alex. Just from a news perspective, if you're pitching, you have a small business or a nonprofit, to Kevin's point earlier, you want to find a way to tie it into COVID-19 in some way. But it doesn't have to be, specific to COVID-19. It can be, you want to have a human story to it, how COVID-19 is impacting your business or your employees, or how you may be doing something successful or something innovative you've done and changed the way your business is operating amid COVID-19 to work with customers. So there's a whole range of ways that you can kind of plug into that. And it goes back to the storytelling question, is you really have to think about, the news wants to cover COVID-19, but they want to cover positive stories now. They don't want everything to be negative. So there's a hunger both among consumers, news consumers, but also with the news producers. They want to cover things from a positive perspective. So if you have a positive story to tell, there's opportunity for you right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Alex, let me just follow up with Pete. I mean, Pete is exactly right. I mean, there's a huge thirst to get outside of the the Governor Wolf press conference, the Governor Murphy press conference, the Mayor Jim Kenney press conference. Every single day we're deluged with here's the latest and greatest numbers, and here's the body count and so forth. And more outlets, as Pete said, are thirsty for what's that story on Main Street that we might be able to do and get us outside of that press conference room and try to get into a community or a neighborhood where we can tell stories about people and about those folks that are grinding to keep their businesses open or trying to survive during the pandemic. And let me bring up, I mean, several of the stations, including 6ABC, they've launched, they have a Philly Strong segment. NBC has a new segment called Open for Business. KYW Radio has Philly Rising. The Inquirer has the upside. So there are opportunities, and I'm sure the Delco Times has a place for folks to land at, but there are opportunities you just have to go hunt and look for those opportunities and then figure out how are you going to message yourself to get your message inside that newsroom so that reporter picks up the phone and calls you to include you in a larger story. So as you're sitting at home, and we're all in the stay-at-home orders, you can consume different media and find out how do they want to be served up, and then figure out your strategy to target those reporters and editors and producers and so forth.
Yeah, I love that, and I think it's I think that's a great point to add into our discussion. Kevin, want to throw one to you, and this is because we've done a lot of public messaging directly related to COVID. Why has transparency become so important in your public statements? And why is that? What is the shift that you've seen in terms of using transparency and sort of using that sort of humanistic element that we were talking about here in terms of how you pitch and how you must message?
Well, I think transparency is an issue that's just bigger than pitching. Transparency, I think we all sort of feel right now, we feel threatened, we feel endangered, we're stressed, and we look at news coverage when we do about COVID, which is, oh, by the way, all the time. And all we see are people who appear to be giving us versions of the truth. Well, it's not all we see, but too often that's what we see. And so from the press side, what happens is they're looking to see, they're very sensitive to the idea that someone's not telling them the truth, or someone's trying to shade stuff, or someone is trying to spin or manipulate the news. And I can tell you at least a dozen times in the last month, I've been in situations where I can hear it. Sometimes it's direct from a reporter, but even if it's not direct, you can hear it in sort of the approach. And so what I found that works is, you know what, I'm going to tell you the truth. I'm going to say, this is what I can tell you. If you ask me a question, I don't know the answer, I'm going to tell you I don't know. I'm going to try to get it for you if I can, but my client may say, we're not doing that. So I had one earlier in the week where it was an announcement about a healthcare facility that there was a struggle over a transaction involving the sale of this particular facility. And the questions were, well, what aren't you telling me? And so we had to go at it right away and say, look, we're not telling you what we don't know. This thing is happening so quickly. We can't give you information that we don't have ourselves, but we can promise to try and get it for you. And once they believe that that you're not hiding from them, that you're telling them and you're trying to be as transparent as possible, it actually becomes a lot easier to deal with some of these folks and find a way to tell your story.
I like that. And I like the idea that, things are moving at this pace that is just, uncomfortable for anyone. And that from a business owner or from a communicator's perspective, it's okay to acknowledge that we're learning this as well. We're moving as best as we can, and we're doing everything that we can to address whatever the issue, whatever the thing that might be at stake is. But I just think that that's a really great point. It's okay to say, you know what, we're working on that answer. We're going to go back and we're going to get that to you. That's no different from, I think, kind of pre-COVID time. But I think Kevin's point, though, because the sort of pace at which we're moving right now is so fast and so uncomfortable, it's more okay to live in that world. Pete, Mike, I want to throw one to you in the same vein. How do you avoid sounding tone deaf right now?
I mean, that's a great question, Alex. Kevin is right. If you're going to try to parachute into the news, it has to be COVID-19 related, because that is just if you watch any of the newscast or you read the paper, the first 12 or 13 minutes of any local newscast are all pandemic related stories. And then if you pick up a hard copy of the Inquirer, it's the same. That front section and then the local section it's page after page of the pandemic. So I think it'd be a huge disservice for you as a small business owner if you go out with that tone deaf message. And, so you just have to drill down and try to figure out what your lane is and try to stay in your lane. And then, as restrictions get lifted, maybe it's that sidebar story that you may be able to pitch out as the bright lights kind of dim down a little bit during, in the COVID-19 era here.
Yeah.
Just to add that, I think it's, mindfulness, I guess. You have to be mindful that, you're not the only one who's being impacted. Your business is not the only one being impacted by, COVID-19. And, acknowledge that. Say, look, I know, other businesses are going through very difficult times too, but here's what I'm dealing with. And be mindful also that your audience, the news consumers, are all being impacted in a wide variety of ways by this. So I think it's just important to be mindful and, acknowledge other people are going through things and look at things through their perspective, and how, now more than ever, things that you say, how they can be perceived by different people. There's a wide variety of kind of views of, the quarantine, what's going on. Just think about things through different lenses, through different perspectives when you're communicating, and realize not everybody may think the same way you are, and just be cautious about how you approach things and how you talk about things at this time. So,
great. London, anything you want to add to that one?
I just had what I think is a really good concrete example of transparency working in the favor of small businesses and restaurants. I've seen a lot of restaurants addressing the increase in meat prices very directly on their social media and just saying, listen, we don't know what's going to happen, and we just want to be upfront and say we're going to increase our price this week. Hopefully it'll go back down next week, but we're just going to keep you posted because we don't want you to feel like you're being cheated and uninformed. And 9 out of 10 comments, everyone is just like, do what you have to do because we love your product and we want to support you. And thank you for letting us know and not just raising the price of a cheesesteak and not saying anything. So it can be as simple as that. I think just communicating with your audience and making them feel like they're included and part of the process is really valuable.
Yeah. One other piece that I would add to this conversation, which is find the value. Find what is the public value, what is the proposition that you're putting forth, and what is the value to either consumer, to reporter, to stakeholder. So long as you can, stick to your guns that you are providing value in your service, in your company, in your whatever, that's going to really help. And I think that's going to really be, a message that's going to be well received by the public, so long as you're, again, providing value for them. Okay, we got about 10 minutes of my questions, and I also want to make sure that everyone knows if you have any questions, please post them in the chat function area, and we will try to get some of those towards the end of this. And I also have a few questions that people sent beforehand, just in case we don't get any. So we will roll through no matter what. But now I want to take a couple of minutes to talk about some practical tips for pitching. All of us have, again, had some different levels of success and certainly failure since the outbreak has taken effect, and with regards to pitching and landing our stories, landing our clients in the news. Want to start this question, and I'm going to kick this one to Kevin and see maybe we can get some other opinions around the group. What advice would you give to a client as a means to replace a traditional press conference? Naturally, we can't do that right now. We can't put 10 people in a room together with a bunch of cameras and a podium, and only the governors are doing that. What advice would you give to a client to replace that function?
I aim for individual stories, and that means if I'm going to pitch a story, if I'm going to hold up, if I have a client who's going to hold a press conference and 10 reporters show up, it's one-stop shopping. You get to tell your story once and 10 people pick it up. But that doesn't work right now, as you were saying. And so what you have to do instead is you have to tell your story 10 times. So if I want to pitch it to the Inquirer, okay, I'm going to call the Inquirer reporter that I think is the person handling it, and I'm going to pitch the story, and I'm going to make my client available for comments as necessary. I'm going to try and do that in a way that minimizes the amount of time my client has to spend. But that's unfortunately, that's the way to go. So as a practical matter, what it means is you're kind of limiting yourself. You're saying, okay, I'm not going to do 10 stories, but I might do 3 or 4. But that's the way you go. You look for individual stories, and this is on the traditional media side, of course, individual stories that that we look at together and say, well, if we're going to do this, let's aim at that publication or that television station or that radio piece or that website. Because particularly with TV, a lot of the stories now are going to the online website, and you've got to be ready to know that that's where your market's going to be. You're not going to be on TV necessarily. So figure out where you need to be the most and aim at those individually.
Like that fragmented approach. Anybody else want to chime in?
I think Kevin's right. And we talk about this all the time. It's about being a good source, right? And so if people have interviewed you before and they found you to be engaging and colorful, and you told a really succinct story or delivered sound bites in the appropriate way, most times reporters will come back to you for a second bite of the apple because you're good at it, and they want to put folks that are have some experience. Because look, reporters, like everybody else, they all want to go home on time, right? And so they have multiple deadlines throughout the day. They have 2 or 3 deadlines throughout the day, and just like us, they want to go home to their families, rest, decompress, and then get right back up on the wheel again tomorrow and churn out another 2 or 3 pieces of content. And so if you're good at delivering the news bites and the news stories in a way that fits their schedule, you'll get called back and you'll be, in quotations, a source for them. And that could benefit your business. That could benefit, a community program that you're involved with, et cetera, et cetera. So, Kevin's right. It's just, it's a little bit more clunky because you're telling that story 3 or 4 times over, but the benefits, long-term could be positive for you.
Sure.
And, prior to COVID-19, one of the things I've always told people is you have to be available, you have to be flexible, you have to kind of adjust yourself to the news person's, the reporter's schedule, and do anything you can to make their job easier. That's even more the case now than traditionally, just because of kind of the way newsrooms are working remotely. We have one advocacy client that London, Mike, and I work with, and they've been doing TV interviews, across the state. And it's interesting, the guy would have thought, oh, they'll want to do it through Zoom, but the approach is different than I would have thought. They've actually preferred doing it through FaceTime. Then they'll record the FaceTime video and broadcast that. Or if people don't have an iPhone, they're doing it through Skype. So it's interesting how you can do those pitches to different news stations. And so instead of doing, as Kevin said earlier, one interview with 10 stations or 10 different reporters there, it's a lot of one-offs you're doing and individualized interviews that you have to schedule and work with.
Great. London, I want to kind of tweak this question a little bit for you to answer. Any tips on how to use user-generated content, the idea of filming it yourself? Do you have any practical tips in terms of using that to garner news coverage?
Yeah, I think that there's a real opportunity for filming your own video and submitting it to news stations. It, even 3 years ago, it wasn't really something that we were doing, but it's something we're doing regularly now, but especially in this time where, I think that stations are a little bit more comfortable going out, and they have really worked around, they have their mics on giant sticks and things like that. But if you can film some great B-roll or an interview or something yourself, I think, they're willing to take it. So I would just say, on the technical side, hold your phone like this, not like this. Make sure it's steady, and good sound and things like that, and lighting is important, and you can Google all of these things. But what I would say is watch the news and look on their websites and see how they're filming them. Are they panning really slowly? Are they holding it straight? Like, what's the framing look like? And just those little things, and just try to replicate that with what you're doing. And it doesn't have to be perfect. You see all the time, people are grabbing video from social media and people are holding their phones like this. Their faces are really close. Like, it's, you know, it doesn't have to be this pristine production, but the more that you can do to make it look nice, the better chance you have of it getting picked up. And then you can also use whatever it is that you're filming and repurpose that for your social media, an email, whatever it is.
You nailed it, Lennon. I quite literally just had an experience of this last week, was able to go out and, you know, because the sort of nature of the event couldn't invite media, just was not going to be conducive to that given where we were. But, you know, got out there myself with my mask and my phone and, you know, got the video that I needed to tell the story, and not only used it to pitch to televisions and got good pickup on the TVs, but also turned it into a really nice social media post then too. So, you know, double whammy, makes the client happy, gets impact across all the different facets, both earned media and social media. So that's a great one. Mike, want to ask you, for a small business owner, what's the best way to practically approach a reporter for a feature right now? Features are really one of the toughest things, I think, to, you know, for in our business to land for a client. Any practical tips in terms of how you're getting at them? Also, whilst being respectful, I think, is a really important one. So,
I mean, it's a tough question, Alex, as you know, and all of us on this panel. It's really, really difficult to penetrate these newsrooms right now. But there is, you know, factions in different newsrooms who want to go out and be able to tell community stories and feature stories. And, you know, there's plenty of reporters that, you know, they're community journalists. And so, you know, they're not always in the day-to-day breaking news of a story. And so there's opportunities there to target some of those reporters and try to pitch them your story angle. But as we said previously, look, you can't be tone deaf, you know, promoting some happy story about your business when, you know, the numbers in the pandemic have just doubled or tripled on a particular day. And so, you know, that could be a disservice for you, that you're inundating a newsroom on a day where, look, it's just not going to be an opportunity to fight through some of the mess out there. Look, we're the city of Philadelphia, and we work in this region, and we're all about, you know, Rocky and redemption. And so I think, you know, the small business community has been devastated by the pandemic. And so I think there's going to be a thirst and a desire by media outlets and reporters to begin to tell those stories that, look, businesses are reopening, and here are the several businesses that survived and thrived during the pandemic. And they'll want to try to give some of those businesses a little bit of love and recognition.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's provide value, and, you know, do your homework. Find a reporter that you're looking for and get that value story out to that work reporter. So using those two things so Kevin and Pete, I think you both want to jump in here.
I was going to say, just in terms of, you know, Mike talks about the newsroom. The newsrooms are not what they used to be these days. You know, like, I don't know that anybody's actually physically working at the Daily Times necessarily like they were in the past. You know, everybody's kind of, like most of us, working remotely, working from home. That's a little bit different with some of the news broadcasts. You know, they absolutely have some people still on set, right, Mike? But, you know, that's kind of why it's so important to be a consumer of the news and understand who's writing these stories, because you can't just call the newsroom and say, hey, who do I talk to about this? You have to kind of track them down and then look for their email, look for their phone number, their cell phone number, to reach out to them. So it's kind of changed in that way, just that people need to understand that you can't just, you know, call up the news desk and try to find somebody that's going to do a feature story on you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's really, and actually, good question, or good way to jump into our first audience question here, which is basically a really great dovetail right to that. Do you think doing food drops to the newsrooms are a good idea right now? Concept being that someone would like to recognize newsroom employees as frontline workers, whilst also standing out and getting their attention as a good PR consultant.
Alex, I'll take it. I mean, we were we were working on this for a particular client recently.
Yeah.
I would not do a drop of food at a newsroom at this particular time. One is, security to get in the buildings is pretty intense. They just don't want people showing up. They understand that you want to maybe do a food drop, but it's just not feasible to have somebody interact and communicate or touch base with somebody they don't know, or they haven't had, dealings with you before. So I would shy away from it at this particular moment.
Yeah, I think I would have to agree on that front. Again, please, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat area. I'm going to run to a few from our pre-program. Wanted to ask, and this one's probably going to be a little bit more geared towards London, using social media to keep members and customers engaged, and some strategies to remain positive and encouraging while realistic in communications about business plans post COVID-19 closures. So when we reopen, and how do we keep customers engaged going towards that date, even if we don't know what that date is?
Sure. I think you really need to be consistent in your communications now. So like I said, don't just go dark now and then expect that your audience is going to be there for you later on. I was just on a webinar this week for Social Media Week, and they said that on Facebook and Instagram, they have seen a 70% increase in usage over the last month alone. So you have a lot more opportunity to reach a lot more people. And so you're going to have, if you're doing things well right now, you're going to have a larger audience to reach and continue to engage with after all of this is over. And I think that, poses a lot of opportunities. And in terms of being positive, I think the best thing you can do is, just have empathy towards your audience and ask them what they want to see. Because I think, blind positivity is not helpful right now. I think you need to be realistic, but communicating with your audience and asking them the kind of information that they want from you and that they would find useful is the best way to go about it. And like I said, everybody's a human, and everybody realizes that finally that there are people behind the keyboards, behind these social media accounts. So, just owning up to that fact and just kind of engaging in question asking and communication with your audience is the best way to go about it, I think.
Yeah. Looks like we have a few more that are going to be coming in here. But I do want to, there's one that was very specific to our Delco contingency here. So Pete/Mike, changes to the Delco Times now that Phil Herron has left as editor. A very specific question. For those of you who don't know, Phil Herron, I think he was 40 years at Delco Times. So very, very long-term editor there and a real stalwart of the community here. Either of you guys speak to kind of what's going on there with the new editor?
I'll say, Joe Hart's not new to the newspaper. He's been around there for a long time. Obviously has big shoes to fill with, Phil Herron's departure. Phil's just the mainstay of the paper. But I think I don't see a major shift at all in terms of their coverage. I think it's just, anytime there's transition, you need to get your kind of feet underneath you and, get going. So I think things will pretty much, resume as normal under Joe. He'll have some changes he wants to make, I'm sure, but, I don't know if you have anything to add, Mike.
No, I mean, Pete, you're right. I mean, I think Joe is going to want to put his own stamp on the paper, and but their longtime reporters are still there. Kathleen Carey is still there. Alex Rose is still there, and look, I mean, the newspaper industry is in a fight for its life. Whether you're a big paper or a small paper, they're really struggling for ad revenue, and but the Delco Times continues to be a mainstay in Delaware County, and they try to cover their community with the limited resources that they have as best they can. And, and that's why, small business owners and others try to be your own newsroom and come up with your own press release that they may be able to, the more copy or content that you can provide for them, and that they may be able to just copy and paste and get in the paper, the better off you'll be served as a small business owner. And they'll be thankful for the helping hand.
It's great, Mike. Good, another question that kind of touches off of that concept of the press release. I'm going to kick this one to Kevin. So, you know, you've got your press release. You're essentially, you kind of alluded to this a little bit in terms of, you know, your sort of segmented pitching concept. Do you recommend locking in one reporter and kind of repeatedly trying to hit that person, or do you recommend kind of trying to spread that press release around a little bit in this type of environment? Or you're unmuted too, Kevin.
Sorry, it depends on the press release, and I don't mean to flip answer, but if it's something that won't wait, and you're getting stalled by a reporter, then you're going to have to spread it around.
Okay.
If it's something that has a little bit of shelf life, you can try back once or twice, but you have to avoid, and it's a very careful dance, you have to avoid being a pain in the backside, because for reporters, or editors, the easiest way to deal with those types of folks who won't stop banging on my door is to simply say, thank you, I've had enough, and just not deal with you anymore. So you got to be careful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really important. It's one of the things I definitely, we touched on this a little bit too. I mean, it's definitely do your homework, find your target, and, you know, be respectful in how you follow up with them too, because in some cases, like Mike had said, some of these folks, they're in the same boat as we are. We're all working from home, you know, navigating the new reality. They've got multiple deadlines potentially that they're trying to work under, multiple different stories that are flying around at the same time. So, you know, trying to be intentional. Yes, I think this is for you. I think that it's a really great story for you, and here's why. And then when you're doing that follow-up, you know, maybe once a week, you know, again, Kevin had said if it's really urgent and you need to blast it out, then you might change it a little bit. But if you can have that shelf life, I think that's really important. One more here. I think we have probably about time for one more question. I'm going to kick this one to London. So thoughts on non-COVID related content. Do you advise posting content that alludes to normalcy?
I think it depends. So sorry to just kind of be a little vague, but I think you just need to be really clear in your messaging. So if you're for example, if you're posting pictures of people in a group and they're not wearing masks and they're not social distancing, you need to be crystal clear that that is from a while ago, because people will jump down your throat and that is the last thing that you want. And I think when you're thinking about things that you want to post that might not be coronavirus related, just make sure that they're useful, because just posting to post isn't going to help you. It's just going to frustrate your audience that you're not providing useful information, because while people are like, we get it. We're all stressed out. We all know that this is a tough time. Like, you don't need to continue to tell your audience, hey, we're all, you know, struggling. Yes, we are. But I think just going back to posting what you were posting before, or posting things that are only beneficial to you and your brand is one of the ways that you can be tone deaf. So just make sure what you're posting is sensible and useful.
That's great.
Just to add to that, I don't think everything has to be COVID-19 related. You know, you can be having fun content, interactive content. You can be, you know, if you're a restaurant, you can be posting your sales. I mean, it doesn't all have to be COVID-19 related. So, but, you know, I don't necessarily say you can't act like you're open and business as usual either. So it's, you know, the voice, I guess, you speak with over a consistent period of time is really what matters, more so than individualized post. That's just my thoughts.
Great. Well, I think that about does it, guys. We are at 11 o'clock, and I know a couple of us have to run. So thank you, everyone, for joining. And thank you, Kevin, London, Pete, and Mike. Really great to always chat with you guys and be able to pick your brains for a little bit.
And I echo your comments there, Alex. Thank you so very much. I think you can all see the true expertise and the great advice that you received today. I can't thank Bellevue Communications enough. Kevin, Mike, London, Alex, Pete. You've been great partners to the Center for Leadership, and your advice is truly invaluable to everyone, particularly during this time. So we thank you very much for that. As you can see on the resource page there, folks, Neumann Public Safety, also www.nucenterforleadership.com. There were a number of questions that were included, particularly around Zoom, Zoom meetings, different discussions, how you can do things. Please feel free to check those resources out. You'll see quite a few webinar topics that talked about it, as well as short videos that were recorded by a number of people that are on this webinar today that will really help you from resourcing both jobs, Zoom meetings, as well as different wellness discussions, some yoga, and so it's a lot of different topics there. So it's pretty exciting on our end. Finally, I'd like to remind everyone to please make sure to check out Open Indelco. That's the resourcing for open small businesses in the area, as Pete had mentioned earlier. It's important that we get out there and support our community where we're able. So be well, be safe, and again, thank you all for being here today. Have a great day.
And Susan, I see your question there. Yes, there will be a recording of this posted on the NU Center for Leadership website.
Absolutely. And you'll receive a copy of the link as well as your certificate by probably the middle of next week.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.